All right. Hello and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about exposure and response prevention. And we're going to talk about this idea of reaction versus responding. And so, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Cotty, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA response. And before we dive in, I really would just like to ask a quick favor for your support in liking and subscribing and even sharing this on your platforms or any other way that you'd like to support, because that helps the algorithms and the people that run the behind the scenes network and this get to as many people as possible. So we really would appreciate your support. Now, when it comes to ERP, the definition of ERP, right, is exposure and response prevention, and this is really the cornerstone of OCD and anxiety recovery, right? And so we want to make sure we aren't engaging in any behaviors that are feeding that wheel. Now, I want to start the episode off talking about the Oscars. So last night, I don't watch the Oscars. I didn't watch them, but obviously, if you live on social media at all, you've seen, most likely seen what happened where Chris Rock made a joke about Will Smith's wife, and Will Smith walked on stage and slapped him in the face. Now, when I kind of saw, like, I don't really know how to feel about the whole thing. I'm still kind of processing my own perspective on it, but I want to use this as an example because what happened was, from my perspective, that this joke, and again, I don't know the context, I don't know the history of between the two, so it's a thing where I don't have all the facts, but in that particular instance, what I observed was that a joke was made about Will Smith's wife, about her hair, and in that moment, Will Smith stood up, right, walked on stage on national television and assaulted Chris Rock, right? And so I don't know what's going to come of it. There's people that would say it's a good thing, people that would say it's not a good thing. It's and I'll leave you to kind of make your own judgment on it. But what I do know is that he probably wasn't acting from his highest self. And what I mean by that is like he was acting from a very reactive place. His emotions took over and he went and did, right? He just went and acted. Now, I don't know if there'll be ramifications. I really don't. But this is kind of what happens with anxiety and fear, is that when our emotions get overflown, right, what happens is then we become reactive. And that's why I don't even like the term ERP when it comes to exposure and response prevention, because the difference between a response and a reaction is that you are responding from a higher place. You're responding with the greatest good in mind, where a reaction, you're operating almost solely from emotion, right? And really you're acting to resolve an emotion. So when we talk about exposure and response prevention, I actually think it's better to talk about exposure and reaction prevention, right? From that context, because when we talk about, like, you're going to do something when the fear's there, right? The question is, are you going to do something? You're going to respond in some way, right? We're not going to prevent all responses. Like, you're not just going to sit there and do nothing. But the question is, are you going to respond in a way that's going to reinforce the loop and feed the fear and keep you stuck? Or are you going to respond in a way that's going to help with your long-term health and recovery? Right. And if you're reacting to the fear and you're reacting to the emotions, well, that's most likely going to lead you to a behavior that's going to feed the wheel. So differentiating that for yourself on this journey is important, because you have to know when you're being reactive. And most of the time, we don't really know when we're being reactive because we're so overtaken with emotion. Like when you get really anxious, and I mean, like, really, really anxious or stressed, or, whatever it is that you're feeling, oftentimes we convince ourselves that we're being logical, you know? Like, I'm sure, there's a certain level of Will Smith's mind that was saying, hey, like, this is the right thing to do. And from an honor culture perspective, like, again, sure, maybe it was. And this is the thing. I don't have the full context of the story, but watching, someone who has the kind of following and status of Will Smith in Hollywood get so reactive to walk on stage while someone else is talking and physically assault them. um I don't know that that was the highest move he could have done. And it's a thing where, and I don't know what's going to come of that, right? So it's like he might have won that moment, quote unquote, but what's going to come of that now? you know like, how many other people are going to mimic that because he displayed that, and young people that idolize him think, well, okay, well, that's how I can resolve my issues because that's how he does, right? It's like, these are the questions that we need to ask. And I don't want to harp on this too much. It's just like, I think it's a good use case for this particular idea of reaction versus responding. And when it comes to your own fears, the question that I think needs to be posed is, okay, when am I reacting? And what does reacting really look like to me? When are my emotions so high that I'm not really in control of myself and I'm just doing something? Even though I tell myself I'm making the choice, I'm just doing something because I am so emotional that I just have to resolve this emotion. See, that's how I perceive what happened last night at the Oscars, was that the emotion was so intense that the reaction was just to go do that, right? I don't really think that was a calculated move in any way, shape, or form. And you know, it time will tell. But this is the same kind of thing that we can use to reference in our own life, right? When do my emotions get so intense that I just go into reaction, and what reactions do I engage in? It's like I just get so nervous that I have to go and compulse and get reassurance, or avoid, or stay, I mean, like, fill in the behavior that you engage in. When you get reactive, like, that's what you're going to default to. And that happens when your emotions get so overwhelming that you just cave. So when we talk about exposure and response prevention, really what we're talking about is, when I get super emotional, how can I step out of that for just a second and choose a behavior path that's going to align with my highest good and my highest goals and my long-term recovery? That's what exposure and response prevention is. Again, you can even call it exposure and reaction prevention. But we want to respond in a way that is going to lead us to recovery and lead us to long-term health, and not into the loop. And the way that we do that is, first we have to know when we're being overcome with emotion. We have to develop awareness for that. And that awareness, right, is tough to build. So that's why things like meditation and other self-work, practices, just being aware of when you are emotional. Most people really aren't that aware of it. So when you can start to develop awareness of that, then you can start to see when your cup's starting to fill up, right? And then start to, okay, hey, I need to step back. I need to, diffuse from my emotions a little bit, let myself calm down. And again, realizing that when you are super emotional, that time is not the time to make the decision, almost ever. So, when it comes to exposure and response prevention, and kind of using this in the parallel of fear, when you get really emotional, really afraid, really anxious, really stressed, learning to step back from that, okay, and kind of say, okay, this is what's happening. I really am experiencing this emotion. I'm not denying it. I'm not suppressing it. I'm not trying to bury it. It's like, I really am experiencing this emotion right now. And then I can take a calculated stance and say, okay, here's how I'm going to respond to this. That's going to align with my highest good. Here's what my emotions want me to do. Okay, that's okay. We know what that is. But I know, and I've been down that route, and I'm not going to go in that loop anymore. So I'm going to pull myself back, and I'm just going to take a deep breath, right? I'm still experiencing the emotion, but I'm going to choose to respond in a way that's probably not how I want to react, but it's in alignment with my long-term recovery and long-term goals. And the more and more we're able to do that, that's what exposure and response prevention really is. That's what recovery is. It's saying I'm not going, and then eventually our emotions calm down on their own, and we realize that we didn't need to react that way. And our body comes back to homeostasis, and it doesn't reinforce that trigger, right? So that's the whole premise of exposure and response prevention. But that difference of reacting and responding is so critical to our success. And I just thought it was a good learning point for all of us, right? And again, I'm not making a judgment on the event itself. I'm really kind of dissecting the idea of when you get overcome with emotion and you just react. Well, that can lead to certain things, right? And that's what I saw happen last night. I saw a very reactive consciousness just get overcome with emotion. And again, I don't know the history, and walked on stage and did what he did. Now, the whole reason I'm using that again is just to start paralleling yourself with that and start to notice that you're human too. That can happen to anyone. It happens to me, right? It's not like this is not a look down upon situation. This is like, we got to understand emotion is very powerful. So especially when you're talking about things like anger and fear, like the two most probably powerful emotions we can experience. When you experience them, it's so important that you're able to retract yourself from that. Okay. Because I've gotten into reactive consciousness many times, right? And I'm sure you have too. So when we get into that state, it's really just about noticing that we're in that state first, just being aware, oh shoot, like, hey, I'm in this state, coming back, and then like making a conscious choice at that moment. When your emotion's really high, that's where the work is. What am I going to do right now? Am I going to react or am I going to respond? And that's the cornerstone right there of recovery. So I hope this was helpful. And again, if you're wrestling with OCD and anxiety, we have some links right down in the notes to some resources to get you started on your journey, as well as over at restoredminds.com. We have several ways that we can support you on this journey. So please, head over there, check us out, and reach out to us. So thank you so much for hanging out today. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode. Take care.